So our next speaker is Haydyn. I've known Haydyn for quite a few years now. I think it's, gosh, maybe about 5 or so years. I think I
I
have
think
to
so, yeah.
blame Jack Burton for knowing you. So Jack Burton, he's one of my former students that's taken my clinical UX course, and he's always been singing Haydyn's praises with regards to his huge command of healthcare behavioral science. That's what's got me knowing about Haydyn, because I talk about, I do healthcare behavioral science. This is a healthcare behavioral science guru. I've noticed.
Oh dear.
Yes, I've put a little bit of pressure, but it's
Yeah,
the truth. You back it up, man. The work that you've been doing is really, really exciting.
thank you.
But what are you going to be sharing with us today?
So I'm going to be talking about a concept called digital phenotyping, which is a relatively new concept, and it brings together all this idea of sensors and information that we create as humans to help us be better humans, essentially. But my research that I'm going to be talking about is a very practical aspect, but then I'll bring it back to my commercial work as well. So lots of potentially interesting things.
No, I trust you. I believe it's going to be a great talk. Right, thank you, Haydyn.
No
We look forward
worries.
to listen to everything you have to say.
Thank you, Giles. Okay, so just a brief intro into myself. No pressure from Giles there about setting me up at all. I've been in the UX industry for about 17 years. My current role is a leadership position at AstraZeneca, but I'm here in a non-AstraZeneca capacity today. I'm here to talk to you as a researcher, as a human being. I have a background, I trained in HCI, and then I retrained in behavioral psychology. And then for some reason decided that I wanted to retrain again. I'm currently a doctoral researcher down in Swansea University, which is on the beautiful South Wales coast. So I do two types of research. I work in the HCI Fit Lab, which is a genuine state-of-the-art computer science, AI, math, statistics area, which is half my background. And then I also work in the School of Medicine and Psychology. So my work fuses deep AI learning models, HCI, on like real world stuff to make humans better. It's actually not got much to do with my day job, because most of my day job now is PowerPoints and budget forecasts and speaking to execs. So this is, yeah. But I've also spent the last 7 years in AstraZeneca working across healthcare, medtech. That's been interesting. Lots of different areas. So I've worked across cardiovascular, renal, metabolic, respiratory. I've worked across devices, physical devices, connected devices, things like that. I'm sorry for the awful photo as well. Not very good at photos. I don't have video or I don't have audio, but I do have props today. And they're good props as well. And if you want the props afterwards, you might not want the props afterwards, but if you do want the props afterwards, you can have them. So we're going to dive into digital phenotyping, and then we're going to look at it from a user experience and a behavioral science perspective, because all of this stuff in AI, and I know this as a researcher and someone who works in industry, if it can't be applied and it can't be used and it can't be commercialized, and it doesn't have a net altruistic benefit to society, this is my own personal views, then what's the point? And then we'll look at some practical ways that people across user experience research can try and integrate some of this work. There is some stuff in here today. I'm not a medical doctor. Speak to that man there if you want medical if you want medical advice, because yeah, I don't want whatever it is, the board of doctors chasing me with sticks, Giles. So okay, so whenever I give a presentation, I like to stand back and think, what would the audience want to challenge me about? So all of this information that I'm going to give you today, I want you to try and disagree with it. I want you to think critically about what I'm telling you, what it means for you as an individual. I put a science warning. There's some science in here. I don't stray away from that. It is my background. I like to fuse the two between practical user experience, but also on a slightly deeper note. This presentation does talk about body image. It does talk about obesity. It does talk about sugar, and it does talk about mental health. So if any of these are triggers, feel free to leave now, or don't. It's up to you. So the first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce you to XY. XY is a data scientist He's worked for loads of large organizations. And XY, he's always struggled with his body image. He's always struggled with the things that he eats, the lack of exercise that he gets, the consumption of healthy food and healthy snacks. Now, XY, like a large part of the population, knows that he needs to do better, but XY can't do better. So can digital phenotyping help? And interestingly, recent stats from England survey estimate that 25.9% of adults in England are obese and 37.9% are overweight but not obese. Now, there's a reason why XY looks like me, because in 2012, I was 17 stone. And I dealt with all the stuff that comes with that. So the psychological side that comes with being obese. In my youth, I was a footballer, believe it or not. I was super fit. Stuff happens, right, in life. Things change. So XY is a little bit of a story about me and the journey I've gone on as well. And hopefully this might be interesting to you. But let's get into the science and the research. Let's think about what digital phenotyping is at a really basic level. So sensors have been around for a long time. But bringing sensors together in a practical way to help people is a relatively new endeavor. So back in 2014, 15, probably slightly earlier, the mental health field, psychiatry field, realized that the way that they were treating people, the treatment programs and the pathways weren't really working that much. And they needed more quantitative real-time data instead of less self-reporting or self-reflective data, which is what often happens in clinical practice. Someone goes through a treatment pathway, then they answer some clinical questions, and then the healthcare professional makes a decision. Not always like that, but that's kind of what happens. So what is digital phenotyping? Well, this idea that we have wearables. So I'm wearing a Garmin watch. I also wear a Whoop. My phone tracks pretty much everything that I do. And we'll talk about ethics later. So this is the idea that we're leveraging data that comes from personal digital devices. So our smartphones, like I mentioned, wearables, internet-connected devices, social media. And the idea here is to quantify human behavior. So we're getting right into the detail here. So if someone does something, how do we quantify that human behavior? Now, for those who don't come from a stats background, behavioral science background, that's fine, because I can tell you now as a researcher, the qualitative stuff is just as important as the quant stuff when it comes to digital phenotyping. So sensor data is usually collected from things like wearables, smartphones, ambient sensors. You might move around a doctor's office in the future. You can check your body temperature, might measure your stress levels, your data, and this is the ethical stuff we'll talk about later, could be mined from social media. And there's lots of stuff around machine learning models and deep learning models around social data. And I'll show you some of the stuff that I've been doing, sort of the deep learning models I've been working with in some Python code later, just to show you the absurdity of this. So just to reiterate this point, digital phenotyping is about quantifying human behavior. So what you do in a numbers game, essentially, and then helping you do something with it. It collects data actively and passively. So this is data in the background, and then data that you self-report as well, as we talked about. It's about improving diagnosis, monitoring, and treatment. As I mentioned, it's been used in the fields of psychiatry, neurology, and I'm not going to talk about personalized medicine today because it's beyond my scope of expertise, but we are getting towards a personalized medicine space, especially with genotypes and phenotypes like we're talking about today. And if you've worked in medtech and health tech for any period of time, you'll know about remote patient monitoring, and real-time interventions, or now the big field is just-in-time interventions, which are changing rapidly. Now, we'll come on to this later. There's a picture of a doctor with a cross through them. It's an emoji, not a real person. This is healthcare without doctors in the loop. And this is starting to get into ethical dilemmas now, which we'll talk about later. So if you're a patient and you're being remotely monitored, perhaps you're wearing a CGM like I've done. I'm not wearing it today, but I've done in the past. And all this data is coming in from multiple sources, and you're getting real-time feedback on what to do next or what not to do next. What's the value of a healthcare professional? There is value, by the way, Giles. I'm just... it's a rhetorical question. I'll get through this bit. Markedly, this is a sort of a dry introduction. We're going to get into some cool stuff, I promise. But just thinking about passive and active data, I'm not sure if you're aware of what your smartphone can do. it can do way more than you probably use it for, like way, way more. The hardware and the software that's built into this stuff. So passive data is about data that runs in the background, mostly quantitatively. So we've got phone use, GPS, social media, depending on where it comes from. I'm not going to talk about digital biomarkers today, but there are biomarkers, things like skin temperature or galvanic skin response temperature, HRV, voice, all these types of things. And then you've got data that comes from activity and exercise, so things like sleep tracking, walking, movement. And like I mentioned before, active data, so ecological momentary assessment, which is another area that I work in, and patient-reported outcome data. There's a massive crossover between active and passive data when it comes to questionnaires and getting access to that data as well. But I just want you to take a moment to think about all the data that you generate. Are you aware of all the data that you generate? Probably not. I'm not aware of all the data that I generate. I don't know where it goes. I don't know who owns it. I'm not sure I want to know because I probably generated terabytes of it. So we will talk about the ethical implications of this, but digital phenotyping is about using these types of active and passive data for positive outcomes in a health perspective. So just some examples from clinical neurology, people who suffer or going through the diagnosis programs for autism, ataxia, which is a horrible illness, motor neurons disease, Lou Gehrig's, Alzheimer's. For example, what can a device do? Now, granted, these are in clinical trials, but they could be used in population health. For example, mobile device cameras for gaze latency, saccade latency, basically what happens with your eyes, and then mobile device microphones for things related to your speech, which are predictors for these types of illnesses. Now, to me, that's a really good use of data. If you can help people predict or understand that they're heading toward this pathway, you might not be able to change some of these health outcomes, but you might be able to get care earlier, or you might be able to get diagnosed earlier, or you might have a better health pathway, then that's a win in my book. And then another example, which has nothing to do really with sort of more hardcore health stuff, as I would call it, social trails. There is a massive untapped market in social trails. So this is a study from 2015. It's a time and density plot that was used for insomnia research in digital phenotyping. And they used this cohort to measure and monitor at what density and at what time people were talking about their insomnia related outcomes. So we've got things like can't sleep there, hashtag team no sleep, can't sleep because I can't stop thinking. So here we actually get into something a bit interesting because we have qualitative data, but it's actually being mined quantitatively over a time and density distribution or a function to understand what's going on. Now, just a quick poll, put your hands up if you would be comfortable someone mining your social data. Yeah, that's not many people. Yeah, okay. We'll come back to that. I'll ask you that question at the end again. So just a simple redefinition. Through the lens of a digital phenotype, so the expression of someone's behavior, i.e. what you do, reveals the spectrum of who you are. Now, to me, that's quite a fundamental statement, right? What you do defines who you are in a healthcare setting. Do you know what you do defines who you are? Are you even aware of that? Probably not. I'm not aware of all the things that I do. Or in simple terms, and this is part of my research, and I love this statement that I found in the literature, how can we use information or data to help uncover the hidden self? Do you like the idea of the hidden self? Do you want to be uncovered? That's a weird question, but you know what I mean. Do you want to know yourself, who you are, through the way you express yourself behaviorally? Do you want other people to know who you are through the way you express yourself behaviorally? Do you want that to impact your health outcomes? Something to think about. Okay, enough of the theory. Let's do something practical. Unhealthy snacks. Snickers, creamy peanut butter bar, probably competing with Reese's. I'm not going to do the full moon, half moon. Reese's? Good? Thank you. You should be banned.
Some yesterday.
£14.60. Tesco. Thanks, Tesco. Yeah, unhealthy snacks. Now, these may look innocuous, right? I have the old bag of Skittles. I do. I love Jaffa cakes. I run a lot and cycle a lot to regulate my weight, my mental health. I drink Lucozade. I'm a human being, like everyone else. There's a problem with this. A really big problem with this. And I'll tell you more about this. So, unhealthy snacks, what are they typically characterized by? Well, their nutritional profile. They might be low in calories. What are they usually high in? They want to shout? Sugar. Free sugar. Now, I'm not a nutritionist. You don't need to be a nutritionist to know that free sugar is probably one of the worst things that's ever been invented by humankind. Ever. If you've read any of the latest research on, I've forgotten the lady's name, but she wrote a book called The Glucose Revolution about flattening your glucose curve and insulin resistance. You know that it's not calories that are necessarily important, it's the quality of food that you put in your body and how you eat, when you eat, how you flatten your glucose curve. So how are these snacks consumed? Well, habit. We're getting into behavioral science straight away. Emotional eating, it's a psychological issue. Social pressures, it's a psychological issue. And all of these things are linked to, as the literature says, adiposity, which is just fat, and other health issues. So, replacing one unhealthy snack could significantly reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease. So I'm not telling you what to eat or what not to eat. That's entirely your choice. You're all adults. But just replacing one thing, a small behavior change, can impact your metabolic and cardiovascular health. And we'll figure out what this is going to do in digital phenotyping in a second. But I just wanted to bring this point across. Now, the NHS says that you should have 30 grams of free sugar a day, so 210 grams of free sugar a week. The NHS also said that in 2016, we consumed 700 grams of sugar a week. I got my wife, who works for the NHS, actually. She sat down last night, she calculated the calories, saturated fat, and the total free sugars. So if you eat 700 grams of sugar a week, and let me put the Jaffa cakes back. That is 419.25 grams of free sugar. It's 3,754 calories, which is quite low for what it appears, and 58.89 grams of saturated fat. Let me ask you a question. Would you put 1.7 times of that in your body per week? No. But people do. Because it's the way we've been marketed to, the way that we work in society, our lives, human nature, means that we consume stuff. It just happens. For example, I promised myself not to have coffee with sugars or sweeteners. What did I do this morning? I went to some coffee place and got a sweetened coffee. It's just my nature. It's human behavior. So let's go back to XY. XY consumes, and this is me, remember, consumes lots of free sugar, lots of food with saturated fat, quick wins because it's easy. But XY knows that he needs to do better. So what can we draw on from the behavioral science literature? Well, the intention-action gap. Now, this isn't the only theory about human behavior. There are many, many theories of human behavior when it comes to health psychology. But it's basically the difference between what you intend to do and what you actually do. When was the last time that you set yourself a goal or a habit, and the recent research is changing from habits to rituals, and you said, look, myself, I'm going to do better. I'm going to run more. I'm going to speak to my parents more. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z more. Have you done it? Once or twice. Do you still want to do it? Yeah, of course you do. You're probably a good human being. You want to be social, you want to feel better about yourself. So the difference between our values and intentions, who we are as human beings, fundamentally underpins what we do and our behaviors and our actions. Something to think about. So where does technology come in for this? I'm going to give you 4 examples of the areas that I'm working in practically, and then I'll show you some stuff, hilarious stuff, from a sort of a hardcore AI perspective, machine deep learning perspective, that I've been working in, that just shows that we're not there yet. we're really not there yet. So let's think about this example. Let's say you're me, or I am me, and you want to eat less junk food. You want to snack less, or you want to snack more healthily. Would you be comfortable with example 1, monitoring location-based eating habits? Right, so if you live in a food desert, put your hands up if you know what a food desert is. Okay, yeah, food desert is essentially an area that has high calorific value food, easy access to it, it's relatively cheap, but getting access to whole foods, high fiber food, things like that is really difficult, really, really difficult. Doesn't matter whether you've got a PhD, no degree, you earn £600,000 a year, or you earn 20 grand a year. Food deserts are a real problem for everyone in population health science. So would you be comfortable with an app? And Angel talked about it before, but this idea of multi-modal design, accessing technology to help us be better, tracking where you are. No. Actually, this has been used in gambling. So people who have gambling addiction signed up to this clinical trial where there was a technology stack built around them, where in Nevada, they went into in and around this area and it went, whoa, whoa, whoa. You've got a serious addiction, move away. And supporting that was clinicians, psychologists, psychiatrists, things like that. So it's not just about technology. So would you be comfortable knowing that someone somewhere is tracking your visits to Dunkin' Donuts, or Costa Coffee, or Tesco's, or a really good place that you can still buy bad stuff from? How would you feel about that? How would you want to be interacted with? Would you want it on your wrists? Would you want it in your pocket? Would you want to be made spatially aware with a headset? We've got to think about these interaction modalities. What about the other way, creating healthy zones? So geofencing areas where you can go into that is really healthy. Would you like to be rewarded for that? Would you like someone or something to say, hey, look, you stayed away from Dunkin' Donuts today, you've gone into Whole Foods, or is that a good example, Whole Foods? I don't know. A healthy place that sells vegetables.
Farmers market.
Farmers market, there you go. Supporting local, things like that. With the social benefits that come with that, because you get the neurotransmitters released, great. Would you want to receive positive feedback from something?
Get a cookie.
Get it. Buy some veg, get some Jaffa cakes. I've worked a lot across medtech, health tech, connected stuff, all sorts of weird and wacky stuff, and this is really incredibly difficult to do. Angel mentioned about regulatory stuff. You've got software as a medical device classification, FDA, MHRA approval. You better have deep pockets and a lot of time if you're going to do this properly. Okay, what about physiological and social patterns? How do you feel about this? So identifying low activity periods. So CGMs, heart rate monitors that go, who turns the get up and walk notifications off on their Apple Watch or their Garmin? Who doesn't like them? Yeah, it's a bit of a nanny state, right, isn't it? The whole point of behavioral economics was to provide some oversight and then give you a little bit of space to do stuff. I think we've gone the other way a little bit with behavioral economics in this. Would you feel comfortable knowing, for example, in the femtech space, would you be comfortable knowing that someone knows your monthly cycle data and the impact that it has on you as an individual for low activity periods and your food consumption? How would you want to be communicated to? Would you feel comfortable with that? If you're a man and you don't experience these issues, what does that mean for you? If you're in a privileged position, what does that mean for you? How would you like to be communicated to? We won't talk about health equity today, but it's something that plays into this quite frequently. What about social media activity? We talked about this with the time and identity graphs before. What about if you're tweeting, or I'm not on Facebook and I'm not on Twitter, but say you put something on social media that was pretty destructive. It showed a pattern of perhaps mental health problems, preclinical pre-diagnosis, things like that. How does that relate with your food choices? Well, it has a massive correlation with your mental health and what you eat. All sorts of things, all sorts of diagnoses. Would you like your social data to be tracked, run through a deep learning algorithm that categorizes your sentiment and what you're saying about yourself and what you eat, and then for something to come back and say, actually, do you know what? I think you need to move that way a little bit. This is what we talk about in AI. This is what we talk about in human-computer interaction in UX. But we don't really get into detail sometimes. And when we get into the detail, we suddenly realize pretty quickly that there are massive ethical implications for this. This is all great, shiny, it's interesting. But what's the net result for all of this? So this is the model that I'm working with. I've put my name at the bottom of it. You can steal it, I don't really care. If you want to take this. So this idea is that you have behavior as humans. We manifest behavior. We do stuff, we say stuff. I constantly put my hands behind my back. Does that mean that it's preclinical diagnosis for some form of cancer? Maybe. Maybe we don't know yet, but we might know in 5 or 10 years or 15 years pretty quickly. Our gait movements, our body movements, our arm movements, our reflexes. I didn't go into detail about what our phones can capture, but they can capture a lot of stuff. So this idea that we manifest our phenotype from a digital perspective, so digital biomarkers, where we live, where we move, how we move, what we say, what our physiological symptoms say about us, our resting heart rate, our BMR, our net glucose or insulin levels, the way we talk about each other and food, all of that is an expression of our digital phenotype. And then all of this goes into an algorithm or algorithms. Do we know what the problem with algorithms are? Besides everything? Everything. Because they're essentially black boxes, especially with the stuff that I work with. And then we go to intervention types. Now, I put a nice little picture of Giles there in the top right as a doctor. We still absolutely need qualified healthcare professionals to be part of this. I'm not a clinician. We need people like Giles. We need other, are any other clinicians in the audience? Okay. You're absolutely needed and wanted because technology is going at such an advanced pace that the human element is really important in what we're doing. And then the modalities that this is delivered by, is it phone, is it watch, is it headset, is it some form of spatial computing that we don't know about? What is it? When's it going to happen? What does it mean? So this model basically explains what we express, where it goes into, the intervention that comes out, the human in the loop, the reactive way that algorithms take this data, do something with it, and then we want to measure, has this been a net change in behavior? So, for example, have you reduced your snacking consumption? Does your mental health score, whatever you're being measured on clinically, is that lower? Okay, now bear with me, this has like gone from model to AI. So the stuff that I work in, I don't really tell people about it because people switch off. Things like logistic regression, deep learning neural networks and CNNs. I'm just going to switch over to Visual Studio. I can't really zoom in, but so at the moment I'm working in transformers for zero-shot classification for taking a bunch of text from how people say stuff about their health and understanding if this BART model from Facebook and the zero-shot classification models accurately classify this stuff. Because if they don't, we've got a problem. So if someone says a bunch of stuff and you miscategorize, you've got a problem, a huge problem, which is why the models have to be trained. Often on proprietary data, talks about RAGs, things like that. The labels that I fed it were smoking, snacking, and golf. We can see that the statistical probability of the scores higher on the first one, lower and lower again on the second one. And it tells you all sorts of interesting stuff if you're into that. The second one that I'm working in is transform models for summarization. Now, I put this in as a bit of a joke. I asked GPT-4 to create me a story for a fake classification model. And for some reason, it created a story about a badger named Barry who smoked weed. I don't know why. Yeah. Barney, yeah. And we can read what happened to Barney. Barney became addicted to a narcotic plant. I wonder what that is. Barney's health deteriorated and his fur lost its luster. Poor Barney. Even the strongest can fall prey to temptation. Right, so jokes aside, if you feed health data into pipeline transformer models, and you're getting this, now I know there's a lot, and this is the basic example from Hugging Face. If you're taking these models and you're doing real stuff with them, you better be prepared to work through this. And then what I like to do as well, I fed it some of my own health psychology research, and I won't tell you what it said. It wasn't very good. Rouge or Rogue, however you want to say it, is basically the statistical equivalent of human classification of the quality of content that gets summarized. So are these deep learning models actually making sense, or are they complete nonsense? Best thing to do is get someone to read what they say. So just want to give you an example. I've talked about this in theory, but if you do it in practice, you're usually working with transformer models for summarization or zero-shot classification, because that's how you're going to feed your intervention model. So let's go back to my exciting slides. Oh, some stuff about UX. Yeah, I forgot about that. So what on earth has this got to do with us? If you're not in deep research like I am and you don't really care about this stuff, what's the practical application if you work in healthcare, or perhaps you don't work in healthcare but you'd like to? So AI-driven design, it's been here for a long time, but now we're seeing the proliferation of it. It's really in the mainstream. So we need to be aware, perhaps, of the detail of the models that we're working with, how they interact with the data that's coming in, and the data that's coming out. When you do a computer science degree, the number one thing that you're told is junk in, junk out. And that holds true here. But specifically for digital phenotyping, accessible and inclusive design, I'm a massive health equity fan, as much as I can be, because other voices are far more important than mine. But when you're working with this technology stack and design, are you ensuring that access to and inclusivity for interventions in your space are actually inclusive and accessible? The whole point of distributing and decentralizing this stuff is that people should be able to get access to it, right? I'm not going to talk about operational models and finance because it's a different story. What about behavioral design? If you come from psychology or behavioral science, or that's your bag. Well, engagement is key here. We often talk about engagement. What does it mean from a digital health perspective? Well, if you're working in digital phenotyping, you have to be part of this process continuously, otherwise the data trails off. So things like gamification, personalization, which we can't talk about today, the key in engagement for clinical factors. What about UX people? Now, I am a stats nerd. I love statistics. They make me happy. I go to my quiet place. That's really weird, isn't it? Yep. Sometimes my wife has to come and wave a hand in front of my eyes. But contextual research. If you're a qualitative researcher, of which there are many, many really good qual researchers, I've done quite a lot of mixed methods research. But if you're a hardcore qual researcher, your role within digital healthcare and digital phenotyping is to ensure that the context that these healthcare interventions are delivered in, and the understanding that people have of where their data is going, is key. You frame those societal conversations. You frame this back to big organizations and corporations and VCs and tech startups. It's a really crucial role in what we do. But not just there, educational research as well. So you've got all your tech stack sorted, models, you've gone through FDA clearance. So what? What about your healthcare network, the physicians that you work with, your support network? You need to work from a research perspective to understand how this is communicated to people working in digital phenotyping or beyond. And like I said, stats, I won't dwell on that, but if you do like statistics, there's a huge amount of work to be done with data scientists and engineers. Okay. I'm not going to say that how many times I've copied and pasted it. Throughout my research, for all of the AI shiny stuff, for all of the promise of spatial computing and solving population level healthcare problems, through health tech stacks technology, you will not get anywhere. I can tell you that for a fact, unless you address ethics. Now, ethics is a huge word. What does it mean? Well, it's how the data is collected. Where is it stored? Do you have access to it? Do people know it's being stored? How's it being used? Is it going to a third party? Is it being monetized? Is it being sold? Are your physicians aware of it? Is the healthcare network aware of it? What are you going to do with it in the future? Where's it going to be kept? Should you be doing it in the first place? Probably not. Unless you've got a really, really good reason and you can demonstrate clinical efficacy, you need to be sure that you're connecting the dots with the ethics in the middle. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because I think I wasn't here yesterday, but I imagine ethics was brought up quite substantially. If you're working in this space, ethics is a huge variable to work with. Sorry, Charles. So what does this mean for physicians, right? Part of our research as well is looking at if you've now got the ability and the power, you feel empowered as a person to regulate your own healthcare, why should you go to a doctor? It's a rhetorical question. You should go to a doctor. But what does it mean if you've gone through med school? You spent 7 years of training, you've retrained in something specialist, and all of a sudden you've got a dashboard full of stuff with these alerts. Patient X, glucose is there, blood sugar is there, mental health score is there. What we're doing now is the genesis of how we're going to redefine patient to HCP relationships. We're going to empower people, but with the empowerment that comes with empowering people, is the ethical side to that. So are doctors going to disappear? Of course they're not. We need qualified people that have been through med school, psychiatrists, psychologists, health psychologists, people working in behavioral science to help us explain all this and work with patients and clinicians. I'd just like to end on this. This was a quote I discovered about 6 months ago during my research, and I actually sat down and didn't say much for a couple of hours. So let me try and explain this. This is from research from Stanglini and Leone in 2020, and it says, is it, technology, an extrinsic device that has no effect on the way human beings experience and represent their bodies, interpersonal relationships, and the modes in caring about them, and human existence in general? Or, in layman's terms, and this is a statement, our bodies, due to health technology, have or may possibly become redesigned. We need to sit with that for a moment. So for all the endeavors in technology, for all the health tech stacks, for all the AI models, for all the great user experience, are we changing a person? If you have access to your data continually, and it constantly comes back, it's going to impact your behaviors, your attitudes, who you are as a human being, maybe even your genetics. So I'll leave you with that, something to think about. With all the work that we're doing, are we becoming redesigned? Oh, me, XY. So digital phenotyping wasn't around in 2012 when I was obese. So I changed my lifestyle. I started running more, still ate chips, still do, still eat chocolate. But with the help of my wife and other people in my support network, I managed to lose about 4 stone. And that was without technology. So perhaps something to think about. I'll leave you with small wins turn into great victories. Thank you.
That was excellent. I think we can all agree. I think what I really liked was just how honest you were with your own personal story in this, which always makes for a great presentation, but just highlighting just how complicated this is, and crucially questioning what's actually the value that we're trying to bring by working in this space. I think it is really important that we do have these sort of honest conversations. And for those, because everybody else has been here already, I don't normally have this sort of like conversation after a presentation, but it's been very thought-provoking what you've presented here, because it's so easy to work on projects that have all these great ambitions, and if I'm honest, great intent, like the desire to help people live better, healthier lives is there, but actually, are we going about it the right way? And it's asking this question from the get-go is really, really important, because it then ultimately should lead you to do what's best for humanity. So yeah, right. Questions? Any questions from anybody? Sure.
Hi, thank you. That was really good. Really enjoyed that. I guess maybe not a question, but a reflection on some of the things you mentioned. Like I've got the notifications to say stand, go for a walk. I've got the time limit on apps to say you've been looking at it for 20 minutes now, turn it off. And I find it works for the first few weeks or whatever, and then it tails off. And then I just override it and I say ignore. Is there anything in like your research around that and why that is, and how you can make, like how technology can make habits stick rather than just for the first few weeks, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The habit research has changed into ritual research now. People use the term stickiness, which I don't really like. It's about, like we mentioned, your intentions and actions forming habits. Even the research is unclear about how long the habits take to form. Some people say it's X, some people say it's Y. I think when you look at this from a systems thinking perspective, that habit interaction you have with your device is only a small part of a massive ecosystem. And your brain will want to categorize what's more important to you. Most notably survival, regulating your energy. So this is, but I don't have a good answer for this. What I do know is that habit formation, I've worked a lot with behavioral notifications. If you don't get it right, they tend to peak and then drop off pretty quickly. So maybe there's something in the literature and my own research about in the future around building this more into rituals. The problem is if you're coming from a technology perspective, you don't know what someone's rituals are unless they tell you what they are. And that's deeply ingrained personally, societally, things like that. So I would more look about long-term behavior change, which notifications don't necessarily do, than short-term. I mean, notifications like that are classic behavioral economics, which is about short-term change. So yeah, I would look into the rituals research. It's really good. Thank you.
Question here.
Hi, so I'm Izzy Hockman. I'm a UX architect at IPG Health. But I was wondering, for your work in obesity, has the proliferation of semaglutides impacted your work?
Not sure I can answer that because of my so let's take a step back. Let's answer that with GLP-1s or GLP-1s, whatever we're going to call them. I can't speak as a clinician because I'm not. I can't speak from my commercial position, but if you have serious obesity issues and you've gone through a clinical pathway, sometimes those clinical outcomes might be beneficial to a person. This is brand new, right? So we don't know the net effect of what's going to happen in 2, 3, 5, 10 years. From a behavior change perspective, if you're not morbidly obese, and I say not respectfully, clinically, you're overweight or you want to lose a couple of pounds, we've seen through media the way that perhaps celebrities endorse these healthcare sort of behavior change things. I would think very carefully about that. I don't work in that space, but from a behavior change perspective, they're an interesting phenomenon because you now have access to, I can go and buy a GLP-1 for £200 a month, which is not really that much money for semaglutide or something like that. And I know I'll lose weight, but so what? I'd rather do it intrinsically through what I'm motivated to do, through my lifestyle, my relationships, and certain things like that. So the bigger question is, does health tech matter if there's biologics available to change weight? I don't have an answer to that either, because I'm not a biochemist, but I think that's a bigger question, right? So if you have all this health tech stuff, which is around behavior change and ritual change and things like that, and then all of a sudden there's an off-the-shelf biologic that you can inject once a week and you'll see dramatic changes in adipose tissue, fat loss, kidney function, renal function, heart function, cardiovascular disease. That's a good question.
Yeah, I'll also say I am on a semaglutide, so I think the behavior change has been just so amazing. Like you're talking about having to mentally make these changes. I just don't want to eat any of kinds of sugar anymore. There are no food thoughts, no food noise. So all of those, and just so you can see me, I've lost 75 pounds in less than a year. So just to think about, yeah. So I'm a big advocate for them, and I'm just, it's interesting to see there are so many, problems with behavior changes and trying to sustain them, but this medication just throws that away. You don't need to worry about them. And I know that they're being like tested also for other addictions as well. So yeah, just something to think about.
Absolutely. Congratulations on your journey. That's incredible. It really is.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not a clinician or I'm not a biochemist, so I don't know, but